I'm so glad to be able to meet with you guys again tonight. And I got my mama, Yvonne Elizabeth Thompson Copeland, is this lady right here. She's 81 years old, and her mind is sharper than mine by a long shot. And I'm so glad that Melissa and everybody asked me to come back, because it's just so much I'd like to tell about Martinsburg, because I know that we had a lot of publicity and things, and thankfully, rightfully so, about Sugarland, which is just awesome. And I watched the presentation that Mr. Etheridge did, some months ago on the different freed communities. And so it really blessed me to be able to try to carry on a tradition and just tell the stories that have been untold, in the Ag Reserve. I was telling a friend of mine that it seems like, the Ag Reserve is really deep in the history, but, when it came to the Black folks, we kind of got erased from the history. It was as if we weren't there. And Mr. Etheridge established in one of his talks, I believe it was up at the old town hall, that African Americans were really responsible for much of the acquiring of wealth, in the Ag Reserve. You couldn't make money off of this property up here if you didn't have people to work the land, and free labor was just about as good as you could get if you were a business person. So the last presentation I did, I kind of did a synopsis. I did a rundown of the establishment of the community. It was officially established in 1877, but the property in Martinsburg, much of it was bought by a man named John Peters. This home right here that you see is the Thompson homestead. That house is where my mama grew up. This part of the house right here that you see right here, that was built by my great-great-grandfather, who was a former slave. His name was Albert Thompson. He was born in 1812. And he built that 2-story log cabin. And right around 1876, he bought that property officially in 1877. And he bought 1 acre in 1877, and he bought another 1.5 acres in 1878. The 1 acre he put in his daughter's name, and the 2nd acre he put in his son's name, because he wanted to be able to make sure that the property would move along in the family, wouldn't leave the family. And this portion of the property, the house, this portion of the home, was built by his son, who was her grandfather, and his name was Otho Thompson, O-T-H-O. He built this section of the home probably right around, I think they said 1912 or so. And so this is an example. We talked about the establishment of the town, and we talked about how Martinsburg, before I talked about how Martinsburg was the first Black township to be mentioned in the Ag Reserve on an official map, on an official survey in 1879. You can see the landowners' names, Albert Thompson and John Peters, and different names. It was 5 of them that established the township up there. And this is an example of one of the homes, which was actually torn down when I bought the property. Obviously, this property is still here. The plot of land is still there, but the home is not. This home right here is the Thomas home. I'm sorry, I skipped a slide. That's the Thomas home, the Seymour Thomas home. That's around the corner from me. My home is right on Whites Ferry Road. The house that you just saw was on Whites Ferry Road when it was standing. This home is around the corner, and it's the Seymour Thomas home, and it was built probably right around the 1880s, 1890s. And it was a huge home. It's right around the corner on Martinsburg Road. It's still standing. I went over there and took quite a few pictures. If you ever get a chance, don't just walk over there, because the Thomas family is pretty protective of their land. So come by my house first and I'll take you over there. But it's a very big home, and this home, actually, Mom, wasn't this house, didn't he have like a juke joint?
At one time.
Was it in the house?
No.
Oh, okay. See, I was gonna tell y'all the juke joint was in the house, but it wasn't. So Seymour Thomas, the man that owned this home, was a businessman. Huge family, and their family still comes to this house. They still come there and have like family reunions on the property. I don't know why they don't fix the home back up, but that's not my business. This is the side of the home. It's a very, very big house, large house. I'm just showing you guys what these homes look like. This house right here is the Hood Herbert homestead, and was built right around 1907. This was a house that was built by African Americans in the Martinsburg community. First woman to be one of the first ladies to live in this home was one of the first matriarchs to live in this home. She was a teacher, and her daughter, Evelyn Herbert, was a teacher as well. And that was a teacher at the school in Martinsburg. This next slide is a picture of the Loving Charity Hall, which was built right around 1910. And as you can see, has been restored to its former glory. That was a place where the people in the town met. They raised money, they had events there. My mom said, didn't y'all used to watch movies in there, right?
Yes.
They watched movies, they had plays in there. What else did y'all do?
Those are basically the main things that we did. The movies, the dances, the plays, and various programs.
And they did all of that stuff because this place was originally built. These places were built. It was a place, it was an organization called the Love and Charity. And what they would do is build these buildings so that in the freed slave communities, they could raise money, because we weren't allowed to have life insurance. And people needed to be able to have money to put their families away. People needed to be able to have money to bury their loved ones when they passed away. So in each little community, African-American community, you had the church, you had the schoolhouse, and you had the meeting hall. And in Martinsburg, in the state of Maryland, that site on White's Ferry Road is the only site in the state of Maryland that has all three original buildings from the time the time that the township was established. So what we've been told by the historians in Maryland is that we're the only one. Now, there could be some more, and I'm hoping there is more. But this building has been brought back to its former glory, and it's beautiful. It hasn't been redone inside yet, but when it does get done, you all will know. It's gonna be a big party. This guy right here was one of the founding fathers of Martinsburg. His name was John Peters. He was married to my grandfather, John Thompson's aunt, Susan Thompson. So he's my uncle, my great uncle by marriage. I call him J. Pete. J. Pete was a bad man. He bought his freedom in the 1860s. In the early 1860s, he bought his freedom. He was a blacksmith. And in the historical account that I got this photo from, it said that this may be one of the only photos of an African-American blacksmith from that era that exists. So, he was very influential. He was a great businessman, and he bought a lot of property, and he sold property. He actually was one of the ones that sold the property to the folks in the township to build the church and the schoolhouse. And there's the Martinsburg Negro School. And you didn't go there, right?
No.
No, this school closed in 1939 when she was born. But my grandfather went there, and his father went there. So it was two generations of my family that went to that school. And it was established then, and they, I guess, built a better school, right? Did y'all went to a better school?
Yeah, they had built school in Selman Elementary.
Yeah.
School, Selman, Maryland.
Yeah, in Selman. I asked my mother where Selman was, and she said over there by Mount Zion Churches, which is right off of 109. Right down the street right there in the Big Woods community. They called it Selman. I don't know anybody that calls it Selman anymore. But I see like on my grandparents' marriage certificate, it says at the bottom that they were married in Selma, Maryland. Selma, Maryland doesn't really exist anymore. So obviously it was a place, right? And this is the church. You know, we had this. Y'all, we showed you the hall. There's the school, and you see in the background what the hall used to look like, right? That thing was about to collapse for years, and they came up and they trusted, and the state of Maryland found out how valuable it was to, you know, get it back to where it was before, and that's what it looks like now. Thank God. And there's the school, and there's the church, and the church was established in 1879, but it was around the corner up Martinsburg Road, up on a hill, and they actually moved the original church from around the corner on Martinsburg Road down to this site right here on White's Ferry Road. They said they moved it on oxen and some kind of contraption they had of logs, greased logs and oxen, and put this whole entire church building, not this one, but the previous one, on whatever they did. And they moved it from this foundation and put it in this spot. But that church apparently burned down. And they built this church in its stead later in 1903. All right, and let's keep this party moving. Okay. And of course, I put this in here so you can understand that at the end of the day, it's really tough. It was tough living, you know, in the Ag Reserve as an African American, you know, coming out of, you know, living in the shadow of the Civil War. This sign right here that's mentioned in General Lee and Jeb Stuart and Jubal Early, who is the guy that came up with the lost cause, which we don't have enough time to talk about right now. But, you know, these people had their township established in this place where this sign is planted. So the Confederacy and racism and Jim Crow and the specter of really possibly losing your life, you know, was all around them. I mean, my great-great-grandfather bought that property in 1877, and in 1880, George Peck was hung in the middle of Poolesville. You know, that's the place. That's where that was the climate that these folks, you know, had to live in. And so, you know, we go from that to understanding how they tried to, and I wanted to just make a quick transition into some of the everyday things they had to deal with. But before that, I wanted to talk about the climate that they lived in. You know, these people were trying to establish a community. They were trying to establish literally a society, because they weren't included into the society at large. So they had to figure out their own schools. They had to get their teachers. They had to buy land. They had to get people to build churches for them. Many of them had their own skills. Now, I know my great-great-grandfather built his own home. My great-grandfather built the other part of it. These men and women were skilled in what they did. One of the things that they had to do, of course, in everyday life was wash clothes. So we're on to the artifacts part now. Y'all see the good old washboard. Ladies, y'all complain. Men, y'all complain. Folks, y'all complain about washing clothes. Can you imagine that? Listen, that was your spin cycle, gentle, permanent press, all in one. What an amazing item that is, all in one, you know? And it says it's the standard family size. Now, I don't know what the other sizes were, but that was good enough for me. This stuff just hanging around my house, y'all. I'm just pulling this stuff out. That's a sickle, or as some people would call it, a reaper. You know, that's the thing that the Grim Reaper walks around with. And that was something that I know came from, you know, well into the 1800s. You know, it was hanging up. My grandfather kept that around for a while, and I keep it in the garage, hung up and away from termites and anything that could get to it. But this was just a show. These things were things that after these African Americans came out of slavery and they were enabled to buy property and establish communities. You know, this shows the progress that these people who were former slaves were trying to make. They wanted to be on their own. They wanted to be self-sufficient. They had to do things for themselves. And these tools show that, they were trying to make their way. I got a little bit closer of a pic there. Yes. Of the handles that are on there. These are very old tools. I had to be really careful. I could hear my grandfather in my ear. I gave you that picture right there so you could see the curvature on that tool. That was a handmade tool. That wasn't something that was machined. These things were handmade and they were able to be bought in stores, but they were very, very valuable and they meant a lot because these tools were able to bring in the things that folks needed. Now you can see there, that's kind of the jewel of the collection. Y'all know what that is. That's my great grandmother, Mary Ellen Beckwith Thompson's Singer sewing machine. And when I saw it, the first time I saw it, I said, why in the world they don't just throw that thing away? But what this is, listen, this is what this is showing how these people who came out of slavery really did just really work hard and were able to acquire things and become a part of American society, become a part of the economy of the United States of America. This thing was mass produced. I looked it up, they're not worth much because they made so many of them, but it's worth a lot to us. That was Grandma Mary Ellen's Singer sewing machine, and that's what it looks like right now. That sewing machine is older than her dad, who has been dead for almost 30 years now. So, this is very, very precious to us, and you can see the craftsmanship in that beautiful thing. That's this part you see here is this front piece right here. I wanted to show a close up on that so you can see. That's something that you just ordered in the catalog, y'all, back in the day. If you had enough money, you could order that and have it, delivered to your house, or you probably had to go pick it up from somewhere. And you can see just the detail and craftsmanship that they put into this stuff. Our families worked hard to get this stuff. And I mean, any family in America had to work really hard to at that time, in the late 1800s, early 1900s to get something like that. But, the average person doesn't get to see the items, that people that were one generation out of slavery had in their homes. You know what I'm saying? You don't think that they had beautiful things like this in their homes, but they did. When I do my third installment on Martinsburg, I'll show you inside of the old house that I showed you. I got pictures. I found pictures when I moved my mom and dad into the place they're in now. They're closer to us. So we might get them into the Poolesville Seniors because they're only 20 minutes away from us now in the Kentlands. But I found a bunch of pictures that show inside of the old house and the inside of the house that I live in now. But that's just a few of the details there of the sewing machine. And this is a scale, and this is and when I get a little close up on it, you can see it says not legal. It says not legal for use in trade. It's a family scale, and you can't see it. I try to get a close up on it because this scale is really old. But the last patent on it was June 23rd, 03. Now that wasn't 2003. So this scale is probably older than my grandfather too. But what this connotes and shows is that these people were starting to have, this was maybe 25 years, I'd say, after, they were free. They're starting to have some financial independence. They're starting to, the reason they had this scale at home for family use is because they had meat and other things that they were putting on that scale to weigh and to make sure that they were able to, to provide. It was a way for them to provide for their families, a sign that they were providing for their families and had some semblance of self-sufficiency. And I want to move down a little bit because actually, I'll just go ahead. I'll just go straight through. It's fine. The reason I show this is because this is something that has been kept in our family for a long time, and I believe many of these old pieces of silver were things that were passed on to my family members. Some of them may have even come from the places where they may have been enslaved or places where they worked. I know This ladle right here is silver. Most of the stuff in here is all silver. And according to the ages of this stuff, it looks like either something that was given to some of my family members that may have worked for a white family, or maybe some things that were coveted that were taken from the place that, you know, they may have called home before. You know, I know there was a huge landowner by the name of Martin Thompson that lived up in the Barnesville area. It's a place called Thompson's Corner, which is Comus Road and Peachtree Road. All right, so, and there's a lot of Thompsons laying in the cemetery up there in Barnesville in St. Mary's Catholic Church, and y'all know way back then they didn't bury black folk in the same cemetery as white folk. So there's a huge family of Thompsons. Don't know exactly, you know, if my great grandfather came from there, but I wanted to show this to show that there are things in our homes that tie us directly to servitude and slavery in 2021. You know, there's things that we can look at. You know, I know that they didn't have enough money at that time to pay for, and all of this stuff, it was precious to them. Might not have been precious to other people, but at one point it was precious, and precious enough for it to still have been kept by my grandparents. I don't know what the significance of it is. There's other little odds and ends, pieces of silver that we have in our home. Some of it looks like it was worth a lot of money at the time, and it was just given to whoever, and it just showed up. Here's an example of a desk that they would have sat at. Something like what y'all used, right? Mm-hmm. And this is actually my wife's dad's desk. My wife's dad grew up in Buckystown. And so this is a desk that came from my wife's father. And my wife's father was about 25 years older than my mom. So this was a desk that would have come from one of the schools that he was in. And I'm just showing artifacts. This is all stuff that, you know, all but this desk came from Martinsburg. This desk is from somewhere in Buckystown, I believe. And this is a milk can. And somebody, and y'all probably, if you've seen those, you haven't seen very many of them in a long time. This was actually like, my grandma had a couple of them in the basement, and she would put, she would make pillows and put them on here and dress these things up. And we would use them as stools. We would sit on them. But, you know, this is just stuff that I have laying around at the house, y'all. That's what they used to put milk in, and, you know, before they transported it. This is a very significant pick of an old school mason jar, because that's the way that people back in the day, they had to preserve their food. So they would cook their food and preserve it for the winter, and make sure that they had plenty for the family to survive on for the winter. These are just the tools that they used in everyday life. That's, I think, is that what is that, Mom?
I don't know. It's like something they would chop up.
I think it's like a pie. I think it's like a pie, like a pastry cutter, maybe. But I bet it made a whole lot of nice stuff. My grandma was a baking woman. Pies, oh my goodness. Apple pies, cherry pies, lemon meringue pie, German chocolate cake, oh my God, coconut cake. Y'all see that? Sausage grinder, right? You had to have some money to pay for one of those things. This was like top of the line back in the day, this sausage grinder. And if you had a sausage grinder, that means you had some hogs, and you had enough hogs to slaughter them and make sausage. So that's the back of the grinder. And I'll just have random picks. This is another Atlas. It was made by Atlas. It was called the Atlas Strong Shoulder Mason Jar. You know, and I'm gonna go through. Oh yeah, this is a good one. I like this one. This is either a crank for a tractor or a crank for a car, for the front of a car. It's just hanging around. My grandfather just had this stuff hanging around. So that's why I told Melissa, I got a million of them. I got stuff everywhere. These are meat hooks. You know, these people were doing their own thing. You hear me? They had sausage grinders. They had meat hooks. They weren't asking anybody for anything. They were canning their own vegetables. Once they had their own, they knew how to make their own. They knew how to build. They knew how to can their own vegetables. They knew how to cure their own meat because they had been doing it for 200 plus years for somebody else. So they knew how to do this stuff. And they couldn't wait to get on their own. Here's a close-up of the sausage grinder. It was made by Enterprise Manufacturing, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. See that? USA. You see the little spots for the oil to keep the gears. I may try to use it one of these days, just to try to oil it up and see if I can use it. I got close-ups of the little gear. There's 4 or 5 little spots to put oil in this thing. And I guess it was important. It was very important to the family to keep, you know, the tools that you paid a lot. And I know this costs a lot of money, you know, back in the day. That is a front view of the good old sausage grind, the Thompson sausage grind. And here are some lanterns that I found downstairs, just downstairs in the basement. I haven't even been in the attic yet. I know there's more stuff up there. And there's another one. And okay, now questions. Now y'all get to ask questions of this lady right here. Yvonne Thompson Copeland, that's my mama. She was born October 22nd, 1939. In Martinsburg, right?
Yes.
So she was born in Martinsburg, Maryland. And she left in 1957, running and screaming down Whites Ferry Road to get away from that place. We had family in New York, we had family in Pittsburgh, we had family in Washington, D.C. So they knew, this generation and the generation before her knew what the city was all about. My granddaddy wasn't leaving though. He loved Martinsburg and he wasn't going anywhere. So, questions?
You can either send them in the chat. If you don't want to read it out loud, I can read it for you. Or you can feel free to unmute and ask them yourself. Our first question is, how did your mom get to the Selman School?
How'd you get to the Selman School?
Oh, we were transported by a school bus. School bus would pick us up and take us to Selman. We would have to leave like 7:30 early, very early in the morning to get to school, but we all went on the school bus.
Can y'all hear her good?
Yeah, we can.
Well, I mean, she wouldn't be happy if she heard me say good.
Our second question says, first, thank you, Miss Yvonne, for being here. And our question is, Miss Yvonne, have you used any of the artifacts yourself?
No, I have not. A lot of the artifacts that I see on here, I didn't even know were still around.
But I can say this. Now, when I was growing up, we never had butter.
Did you
right?
Discussion?
I mean, we churned butter in, I think, my first grade class, maybe first or second grade class. When I tasted butter, I thought I was in heaven because we never had butter. I found out later on that she didn't have butter in the house because my grandmother used to make them churn butter. And she hates butter. So, you know, when I grew up and had my own home, I went and bought some butter. So they had plenty of chores.
Who provided the bus to the Selman School?
As far as I know, Montgomery County was responsible for transporting us to the school.
Do you know when Martinsburg got electricity?
Oh, gee, I don't remember when they got electricity because all of my time there, we had electricity.
She was spoiled.
So we never had lamps or anything like that. Only except when we had a terrible storm and the power was knocked out, then they went and got the old lamps. Other than that, everything was done by electricity.
So just imagine, she's 81 years old and she's never lived without electricity. That's pretty cool. And she was right there in Martinsburg.
How about city water? Did you always have city water?
No, we didn't have city water. We had a well, and we got water from the well that was in the backyard.
That's a lot of work.
Well, at one time we had a pump, and we would pump to get the water up. And then something happened to the pump, and then we had to use a bucket and a rope to draw the water up from the well until the pump was fixed. Then once the pump was fixed, we went back to pumping water.
Did the Selman School cover all the grades? Was it like kindergarten through high school, or?
I think it was like grades 1 through, I think, 6th grade.
I think it was 1 through 6.
And then where did you go?
From there, we went to Rockville to Lincoln Junior High.
Okay.
In Lincoln Junior High, I guess, well, at the time my mother went to Lincoln, it was junior. But before, Lincoln was the only high school in the county for African Americans. My aunt, her sister, my Aunt Connie, went there. My grandmother graduated from there, right? Her mother.
I think it was called Rockville High.
It was Rockville High back
when
then.
When my mother graduated.
Yeah.
From there.
So her mother was the top of her class. My grandma was smart, man, but she was never able to, do the things that, her skills would have, enabled her to do. She wasn't able to reach her full potential because of the times.
Hey, Chuck.
Yes.
This is Cheryl, Randy's wife.
Mm-hmm.
We just bought the Hood Herbert, or is it Hood Hebert house?
Oh, is that the house y'all live in?
Yeah, I know we told you we moved to the area, but we didn't get a chance to talk to you. So I'm wondering if you have more information about it. It was a history major.
I'll be around the corner and give y'all all the information y'all need.
All right. We got a bunch of stuff moved in and boxes still, as you can see behind me.
So this is my friend. This is my friend Cheryl and my buddy Randy, who's a member.
Yeah, he's not here right now.
He's a good friend of mine that I met him because he came to my house to hunt on my property, and he told me I've been so busy the last couple months. He told me a couple months ago he bought a house on Elmer School Road, and I'm thinking, ain't too many houses on Elmer School Road worth buying right now that you can see that would be for sale. And I thought to myself, now I wonder if they bought Cousin Evelyn's house. So that's where y'all.
Here we are.
Live. That's our cousin's home.
Wow.
African Americans.
You're welcome to come anytime.
Yes, y'all live in one of the original homesteads up there. Yeah. That's a second generation home for the Martinsburg community. Awesome. My mom can tell you all about Cousin Evelyn Herbert.
Excellent. Oh, well, we'll be by in the not too distant future.
That's
Say hi
awesome.
to Tim.
I will.
I'm gonna go off the video again, though. Good to see you.
Good to be seen.
Hey, Chuck, this is Steve Sparenborg. I'm curious to know, could your mother comment on the social life between Martinsburg and other freed Blacks communities in the area, like Sugarloaf or Sugarland and Jerusalem, Selma? Did you travel back and forth to to have relationships with the people who lived in those other communities?
Yes, there were a number of communities, very small communities, and there was a very good connection between the communities. For instance, when they would have, each church would have homecoming, and all of the other communities would participate in each homecoming that was held. Hoosville, Sugarland, Jerusalem, Mount Zion, Warren, all of those small churches, Boyd's, I believe,
Mount Ephraim too.
and all of those small communities, they interacted with each other and fellowshiped with one another on a regular basis.
And they had things called, they had these gatherings called camp meetings too.
Mhm.
You know, where like it was big in the Methodist churches. They would have big camp meetings where all the churches in the area would come together in these big camp areas, and it would be like all day preaching. You know, people would bring food. It would be you know, people out there singing, choirs singing. They would have different baseball teams would come from different communities. Like each community up here had a baseball team. My grandfather was the star. He was a star shortstop. He's legendary. According to old man Ed Brown, that used to own White's Ferry, he said my grandfather was the best shortstop he ever saw, you know. And Ed Brown did tell me, he stopped by my house one day when he found out who I was, probably about 20 years ago. And he told me, he said, you know, my father told me that they sold the land to the blacks up here because it was swampy. He said, you know, that's why they sold this land up here in Martinsburg to the black people. He said, but man, they had the best gardens in the whole area. Because it's like an aquifer that runs right underneath of the property. The water table is very, very high, higher than it is in Poolsville. But we have very good water. We call it Martinsburg Blue. Y'all come by sometime. I'll give you a glass.
Our next
Very good.
question is, are many of the original family's descendants living in Martinsburg today in addition to the Copeland family?
No, I'd say actually it's just me. And around the corner, a gentleman by the name of Charles Thomas. He still lives in his home, and he was born and raised in Martinsburg. And he's somebody that probably would be good to talk to, probably do like an interview with him. You know, he would have a lot to say as well, because he's been up here his whole life. But really, there's nobody left up there, African Americans, but me and him. And then there's a family that lives in a home across the street from him. But that family was owned by the daughter of a gentleman by the name of Seymour Thomas, one of those first homes that I showed you guys. And she passed on, and I believe another family owns that home now. They're African Americans, but they're not originally from up there. So I mean, like if you mention the names of people that were from, you know, Martinsburg, you would have names like Tom. Of course, my family named Thompson, Dorsey, Bell, Graham. There was a name, Rideout, was a name, Peters. Coleman was a big name in Martinsburg. These old family names, the Thomas family, the Warren family, Twyman family, all of these names, you know, the Naylor family, and you know, Naylor, Warren, Peters, and Thompson, those four names were for the original landowners and founders of the community, you know, so they were men of means. And one of the things that I did point out in my first presentation is that the building that my great-great-grandfather built when he moved there, it was a 2-story log cabin. And it was noted that, you know, most people, let alone former slaves, were building 2-story log cabins. 2-story log cabins were seen they said, you know, they weren't seen in this area very often because it took very skilled laborers to build a 2-story log cabin. And so, you know, if you go up on Comus Road, if you take Comus Road going towards the mountain, right before you get there, there's a little 2-story log cabin off to the right there. And that 2-story log cabin looks just like the one that Albert Thompson built. And Thompson's Corner is Comus Road and Peachtree Road. Now I wonder where Albert Thompson learned how to build that 2-story log cabin, just like that one that's sitting up there on Comus Road. See, when you're African American and you have roots like that, when you ride around and you see buildings like that, those are the things that go through your mind. You know, I wonder where my great-great-granddaddy learned how to build like that. And he taught his son, because his son built the other part of the house and it had a spiral staircase in it. These people were skilled laborers, you know, and they weren't the only ones. It wasn't like my family was like a drop in the bucket. This ag reserve was teeming with folks that had all different kinds of skills like that. And they had to survive in a mean old world during that time. And they did it, you know, and they were self-sufficient. And it was a blessing. You know, when I was a little boy, it was like coming to the end of, you know, all of these communities really thriving. People were leaving. Nobody wanted to live in the country anymore. But I remember being a little boy with my, you know, at my mom's, you know, running around behind my mom. And, you know, the cool thing when I was little is that, you know, when we would come up for homecoming at Warren, at the little church up there, it would be people everywhere. And I could just feel like everybody there was my family. And because my mother, nobody cared if I just ran off and went climb a tree or ran, because everybody knew that was Yvonne's boy. That's Chucky. Don't worry about it. Don't let him do nothing crazy, because you know that boy ain't right. Just keep your eye on him. Somebody was going to say something to me, you know. And if Miss Mary Thomas found me, I would try to run, because she loved my cheeks. And she's laughing because they used to not, like, this lady would literally run around the church after me when I would go up there and grab my cheeks, and she would kiss me and leave this big red lipstick print on my face every single time. I'm still traumatized by that. But she was a really nice lady. And I went to see her in the hospital before she passed on. She was a beautiful woman. I told her that she scared me. And she laughed. But I want you to tell a story about the guy who was the preacher, whose wife was a bootlegger.
Oh, no.
Hopefully none of his family's on a Zoom call.
I'm not going to tell that story.
She don't want to tell it. I'm going to tell it. She said it was an assistant pastor up there that lived around the corner from the church, and his wife was selling booze around the corner from the church, man. Martinsburg was a rough spot. Just one of those stories, you know, that we could tell around the table, but, you know, we don't want them other folks to know.
Hey, Chuck, we have a question.
Yes, I'm sorry.
It's probably a bit for your mom, but also for you as the historian. You know, there are a lot of rumors around the area about the passage of the Underground Railroad to different pieces of property in the surrounding area. You know, some of the rumors aren't true, but we don't know. So I was curious to know if you or your mom had, you know, heard any of these stories, and then also if anyone you know or you yourself have any artifacts that you think might be related to that, to the Underground Railroad.
No, I'm not familiar with any of
that. Poolesville was pretty rough, man. Poolesville was a Confederate sympathizing spot.
I think it was too dangerous. All the routes seemed to go up through the Eastern Shore.
Yeah.
If you could get across the bay.
Yeah. I mean, up here, it was so close to the Commonwealth. I mean, if you lived in Poolesville, you might as well have been from Virginia. Right. I mean, they were literally, you know, Maryland had their own Confederate regiment, for crying out loud. You know, many of them, I guess. They had one right there in Poolesville.
That's why we thought, I mean, not just us, but, you know, there were rumors that St. Mary's Catholic Church was the site of the Underground, or a stop.
It's a possible. it's a
It's kind of
possibility.
unusual for the reasons that you're.
But there were in that area up there were plantations going to bed
Yeah.
up
Right.
there. You know, Martin Thompson and Otho Trundle were two of the hugest landowners.
Yeah.
All right, Trundle Road is directly across the street from my house.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, Otho Trundle, you don't know too many people named Otho. My great-grandfather, her grandfather's name was Otho Thompson. Otho Thompson's mom was white. And only thing we know about her is her name was, well, actually, yeah, her name was Eliza. That was Albert Thompson's wife. Now, we don't know if Albert Thompson was, you know, of mixed descent. I mean, you know, we have pictures of him, and he looks to be, you know, a brown dude. He's got kind of, you know, wavy hair, but we don't know. But I know for a fact, you know, the photos that we have of my great-grandfather, her grandfather, he looks like a white dude, you know, and he had red hair. And all his brothers and sisters had red hair. And he had one sister that went to Chicago and married a white dude and passed for white. So we got family up there that's Caucasian that got real strong DNA from Martinsburg. And she never came back, you know? So I guess we start doing these swab tests, we might be able to find each other. You know what I mean? But what I want to say about just some of the history of our family in the Martinsburg area is that it's just a slice. You know, there are so many other stories and so many other families just in the area, you know, from, like my mother said, just from Bigwoods, if we get to talking to some of these folks, you know, about how Bigwoods, you know, the rich history of Bigwoods, and digging into Bigwoods and digging into, you know, even more into Sugar Land and Mount Ephraim. And, you know, these places have vanished. The people are gone, but the history is still there, you know, so we got to catch it while we can.
Yeah.
We have a couple more questions about the school. One question is, how long was the bus ride? And then how were the books and what was your class size?
I guess the bus ride probably was about 20 minutes. May have been longer if we had to pick up other students, because one bus would have to pick up the majority of the kids in the area that were going to Selma. So
What about your books?
the books, as far as I can remember, the books were See Jane Run, and but I don't remember. I just remember having books, but some of the books had been, I believe, used by other students before they came to us. So we didn't really actually have brand new books, but we had used books that someone else had before us.
I remember my dad complaining about that too, how they had outdated books, you know, books that were outdated and used and kind of tattered and beat up.
Are the Loving Hall and church designated historic properties? And if so, does that protect and preserve them from being sold?
Yes, they are. And they actually, the one committee that my mom and many of the descendants from the community formed, the Warren Historic Site Committee, many years ago, actually purchased that property away from the Methodist Church, because when that church became a part of what they call now the United Methodist Church, which was, you know, when they made the church united, it was basically the Black Methodist Church and the White Methodist Church came together. And when they made it the United Methodist Church, all the churches that came in had to deed their property to the United Methodist Church, which was the stupidest thing I ever heard in my life. When these people worked and toiled all their lives to, you know, buy this property and build a church there, then you're gonna just turn it over to some entity that you don't even know. So they had to buy back the property that their forefathers bought with their own money from the United Methodist Church. If there's any Methodists in the house, I apologize.
Oh, Gina.
My mother's a my dad and mom both died in the Wool Methodist. But you know, they when they did that, you know, that's when they merged, that's when, you know, they bought it. So when they bought the property away from the United Methodist Church, that's when they were able to establish ownership, you know, by the group and not by the United Methodist Church. And also, you know, the group is the one that decides whether it can't be sold because it is designated, thankfully, as historic property.
Do we have any more questions?
I have one more, and Chuck, I don't know if you've talked about this before, but are you related to the Warrens that I'm assuming the church was named after? How are they, have we talked about who they are in the community or?
Yeah, you could talk about that.
Oh, I think the church was named after Isaac, someone named Isaac Warren.
Yeah, Isaac Warren was one of the first founders. He was one of the biggest. What it was a bunch of guys got together. They had money, they had skills, they saved their money, they bought property, and then they were able to establish this township and sell parcels of the land to other Black folks. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think that Isaac Warren was the one that gave the money to buy the property where the church was, and so they just named it.
I don't know about that, but I know that
They
the
named
church
it.
was named.
They named it after him because I guess, you know, he was a pretty, you know, I would think if you name a church after a dude, he was probably a pretty upstanding person. You know, we would hope.
So are there still Warrens in the community or?
Yeah, well, they're not up, none of them in Poolesville. I mean, they're still around. There's still plenty of Warrens around, you know, but none of them live in the Poolesville area anymore. There's plenty of them in the cemetery, you know, there's plenty of our family in the cemetery up there, you know. That's another thing we're gonna have to get together and get out there, get some people out there to kind of clear that off as well.
I just have a comment to make. This is George Coakley. I'm just a few years younger than your mom, but I grew up in Baltimore and went to Catholic school, and we had Jane Dick Spot readers, and we left them in the classroom when we went to the next level class the following year. So almost all of our books were used and reused by subsequent classes coming in. So I don't think that was out of the ordinary back then.
Yeah, I think what the difference was, you know, the classes that they were in, you know, these were all like one-room schoolhouses, you know, and a lot of the stuff, a lot of books they were getting here in Montgomery County, they weren't just, you know, passed down. They were like old books that were outdated and you know, they were leftovers is what the students got, you know. And when my mother when they had to get on the bus from Martinsburg to go down to Rockville for high school, now that took what, like an hour and a half, you know, because every Black person in Montgomery County had to go to one high school. It didn't matter if you lived all the way down in Hyatt's, you know, down in Aspen Hill. If you lived in Aspen Hill or if you lived in Martinsburg, you went to the same high school if you wanted to go. And they made your parents pay for it. The African-American parents had to pay for the school bus. The white parents didn't.
Wow.
Because they wanted to discourage us from going to school.
Chuck,
Yeah.
My daughter here wants to show you a picture of the house that they live in, which is right up the street from you off of White Sperry near Waishi. That used to be a church, and she wants to know if you know anything about it. So she's gonna hold it up. And if it's hard to see, we're gonna drive down to your house and show you.
Okay, no, I see it, but I don't know where that is.
Do you know where
that's on Waishi Road.
No. It's, well, you know what? The entrance might used to have been on Waishi, but it's off of White Sperry. Do you know where all the Brooks lives? Like Darren? It's down toward the end of the driveway. And it was a church, and it was an African-American church. And but I can't, that's the only thing I've been able to find is that picture. I haven't been able to find any history on it.
I've never seen that, because you know these driveways around here. You see somebody's driveway, you don't know what's back there. You might go back that driveway and meet something you don't want to see.
Yeah, we're gonna have you over here so you can look
Okay.
at it
All
and
right.
see.
I'm
And maybe
down.
even your mom too. She might recognize it as something.
How you
Um,
doing,
Where'd y'all
man?
get him from?
That's my husband.
You
That's
poor
my-
thing.
I know. Pray for me.
That's my son-in-law. Yeah,
I know that guy.
we know you do.
But yeah, I would love to find out more information because I've had a couple people look into it, and
Mhm.
and then someone sent me that picture of an aerial view, and I know that the neighbors, when they were younger, they used to ride their horses around here, and it was a church. But if you look on a map, like we have this sharing app, it says
Mhm.
Poolsville Church, but
Wow.
no one can find any history about it.
Yeah, she asked Kenny Scholes about it.
If
And
he
Kenny
didn't know,
couldn't
nobody
find
knows.
Yeah, but maybe if you see where it is, it might
Yeah.
be something you or your mom recognizes.
Let's check it out.
Yeah, definitely. I'll be in touch.
Okay.
Hey, Chuck,
Yes, sir.
nice presentation. And well, it was nice seeing you, but I haven't seen your mom. What, 20, 25 years?
Probably.
I said,
Oh,
Mom, there
wow,
go
it's
Mr.
nice.
Richard. She said, where?
Yeah. Nice seeing you.